With 51 days until the first Republican presidential primary debate, there is a real question of how many candidates will actually show up. Unlike 2016, when there were as many as 16 candidates spread across 2 stages, the Republican National Committee set strict criteria for making the debate stage this time around. The party announced that candidates must have 40,000 unique donors, with at least 200 in each of 20 different states, and at least 1% support in 3 national polls between now and August 21st. At the moment, the only candidates that appear to qualify are Donald Trump, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Donald Trump's former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, and former pharmaceutical executive Vivek Ramaswamy. But that debate stage may be even smaller without the current frontrunner in attendance. Donald Trump has hinted heavily that he will skip the debate altogether.
I like to debate. I mean, I probably am here because of debates. I don't mind it at all. But when you're 40 points up and you're running against, and even one came out today that you saw 51 points up, why would I let Ada Hutchinson, I call him Ada because, you know, his name's Asa, but I call him Ada for whatever reason.
Why is that? He needs...
I think he's weak.
Okay.
I think he's ineffective. But why would I let him... Chris Christie, who's got nothing going except I could be tougher on Trump. He's not tougher on anybody's slub. But why would I let these people take shots at me? Why would I allow people at 1% and 2% and 0% to be hitting me with questions all night? You know, I don't think it's fair.
Many of the other candidates have been skittish about going after the ex-president, including his closest competition, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. He outsourced his sharpest attacks on Trump to his social media team, which released a deeply weird video implying that Trump does not hold an acceptable amount of hatred for the LGBTQ community. The opponent most critical of Trump so far is former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. He is hustling to qualify for the debate stage, has been given previews of what Trump and DeSantis might face if he does end up appearing.
He hasn't won a damn thing since 2016. 3-time loser. 2018, we lost the House. 2020, we lost the White House. We lost the United States Senate a couple of weeks later in 2021. And in 2022, we lost 2 more governorships, another Senate seat, and barely took the House of Representatives. Loser, loser, loser. I'm running because he's let us down. He has let us down because he's unwilling. He's unwilling to take responsibility for any of the mistakes that were made, any of the faults that he has, and any of the things that he's done. I'm not comfortable with the way both Governor DeSantis and Donald Trump are moving our debate in this country. They're trying to divide us further, and it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. We have big, big issues to be talking about here. It is a teenage, food fight between Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump. And I don't think that's what leaders should be doing. And it certainly doesn't make me feel inspired as an American on the 4th of July weekend to have this type of back and forth going on.
Which leaves the question open. Will Trump face the pressure or attempt to avoid it altogether? Michelle Goldberg is an opinion columnist for the New York Times. Elie Mystal is the justice correspondent for The Nation. He is back with me. Michelle, you think Donald Trump takes that stage?
Well, I have no idea. I mean, I think that, look, his rationale for not doing it, which is just what's in it for me, is at least honest, which is more than you can say for most Donald Trump utterances. And he's right. I think that in some ways, the very fact that there are no levers to force him onto that debate stage, except maybe ego, if he feels like he's going to get beat up too much in his absence, just shows how weak the Republican Party is, right? The Republican Party kind of is not able to exercise any sort of control or discipline over the people vying for the nomination, which is why even though the leaders of the party are desperate for another candidate, they're not able to do the things that would make a challenge to Trump viable.
You don't think debates matter?
No. I mean, look, I understand why people like them. Nixon, Kennedy, somebody sweated. It was a big deal. I get why people like them. But, if we can just speak as adults here, They don't matter. None of this is going to matter at all. And just the simple idea that you're going to put 5, 6, 7 candidates on the stage, ask them like 3 questions each while they repeat their campaign talking points with, especially when we deal with the Republican Party, with no fact checkers. So
because that seems to me to be the critical point, right? That there would be an opportunity if you actually could hold his or any number of these candidates' feet to the fire on, imagine this, policy issues.
Right? Anything they've actually said, anything they've actually done, if you could bring their records, to bear against them when they lie about their records, if you could do any of that, that might be interesting. But that's not going to happen. And Republicans won't let that happen. So it doesn't matter, actually. Like, I think Michelle's right. Like, there's no actual reason for Trump to do it. It's just going to be people pretending to fight with him when they don't really have the stones to fight with him. And again, he's just going to have an opportunity to lie some more without fact checking. So I can't imagine that anything that happens on that stage, whether he's there or not, is going to move the needle on their party at all.
Michelle Goldberg, let's look at the list of people who have qualified so far for the first Republican debate. So there's Donald Trump. There's Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida. There's Nikki Haley. There's Tim Scott. And then there's Vivek Ramaswamy. I just wonder what that cohort tells you, Michelle, about like this party, where this primary is headed, the fact that this is the list of people who is clearing a pretty bizarre set of standards to get onto that debate stage.
Well, I think part of the problem for Republicans is that the Republican Party has, among its other metrics, it said that whoever's on the debate stage has to pledge to support the eventual nominee, which creates a bind for a lot of candidates who are running specifically because they say that Donald Trump is unfit. And so even if Chris Christie manages to get 1% in the requisite polls, and even if he gets some donations from people who just want to see him on that stage, the whole rationale for his candidacy is that he's running because he can smack Donald Trump around on the debate stage. But it's not clear that he can even clear that final hurdle to get on the stage. I think what's really interesting is, all of the Republicans that you would think in another year, Asa Hutchinson, in, say, 2012, a extremely popular, super conservative Arkansas governor with this kind of genial mane and presidential face, you would think, he would be a top tier candidate. And now he's, he can't even get 1%.
Right. I mean, there's also like the person who was vice president under this person who is like politically still in the game. In a different world, Mike Pence should easily clear the standards to be on that debate stage.
Yeah, if only Trump didn't try to kill him. Yeah. Maybe Mike Pence will be more popular in that party. The thing that I notice when I look at the list of the people who even are clearing this ridiculous bar is that there's no policy difference with Trump. And that's
they've all remade themselves in his image.
And that's the thing with their party at this point. You can have some people like Chris Christie who want to do what Trump wants to do in a different way, but what they want to do is the same. All of the people on that stage are going to be anti-gay, anti-women, anti-schools, anti-education, anti-black, anti-Hispanic. That's their party. That is from the top to the bottom, right? And so all they're debating about really is style. Do you want the guy who tells gay people, I hate you, or do you want the guy who says, oh, I just don't like you today? That's the debate.